Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar, the first webinar in our series of the Advancement User Group this year. Today I'm going to be talking about two of my favorite charts, the Scatterplot and the Heatmap. The idea for the webinar today is to show you how to navigate these charts, the type of information you can gather from them, and also how to set it up for our authors, users. So let's get started. So the Scatterplot and the Heatmap are two very powerful charts because they combine multiple metrics in one visualization. In addition to this, we can also customize them, have different sizes, different groupings in the case of the heat map, and in color the same thing, and then in the scatter plot we can customize even the shape of the points. So let's look first at the scatter plot a little more in detail. The scatter plot basically shows interaction between two fields. So we're going to have a field in our x-axis and then another one on our y-axis, in horizontal and vertical. And then basically what the software is going to do, it's going to plot our values on these two dimensions. And then additionally, we can assign another measure, another field to size, either size or shape the glyphs in different ways. One of the best uses of the Scatterplot, for example, is to analyze and find outliers. So now I wanted to show you an example more specific of the Scatterplot. Before I have in here, it's just mutual funds based on our demo. It's just risk versus performance. So we have the performance and then volatility on the vertical axis. In here I have a more specific sample regarding to advancement. So we have our proposal pipeline. In our horizontal axis we have the age of the proposal ranging from 0 all the way to 38, and then we have the different stages. In this case we have 5 stages. So then we also have the size, which represents the ask amount. So the larger the point, the greater the ask amount that's out for that proposal, and it's colored by the different staff. So in here, as you can see, we have a linear trend line that basically represents the average tendency of the proposals. So that's a good reference point. Anything that falls above our trend line, it's going to represent proposals that are moving relatively fast. We especially like, big proposals like these ones that are having good movement among the pipeline. On the other hand, there's some big proposals too here stuck in these lower stages, and that's understandable to some extent because obviously some bigger amounts are going to take longer to move down the line, but the idea is to get some discussion and some have a second look, if you may, at these different proposals. So another example where we can use the Scatterplot in advancement, and we do commonly, is on the prospect ID. Sometimes we plot gift size versus ratings, and then you can see outliers. Someone is really highly rated but has a small gift size, what's going on there, and that sort of things. So now let's move to our second chart today, to the heat map. The heat map basically is a chart that it's going to be rescaled to fill the whole space, and then we're going to assign values to size the different squares. So the best use of the heat map is when you have a hierarchy, so 2 levels of data. In this case, again, we're back to the mutual funds. So we have the type of funds, so growth or international, mortgages, and so on. And then inside we have a specific funds. So then in addition to the two levels of information there, we can also have the color. In this case, it's the performance, and then also the size, as I said. So in this case, I think it's the net assets of the fund. Moving back to our advancement example, also in our staff performance management, and I'm going to be showing this in a short live demo too after this presentation. But we have in here our primary staff grouped into units or departments, and then the size of each box depends on the ask amount of the proposals that that person or that unit has out. And then the color depends, it's a scale based on the as to current year expected amount. So in this case, we would ideally see big green boxes. And what we wouldn't like to see is some of these red, smaller squares, because these green big boxes mean there's a lot of ask amount out, and there's enough coverage in the ask amount that we can expect a good amount of that money to come in. And I'll go more into detail, and I'll show you the interaction between the two in our demo next. But also, we commonly use a heat map in the annual fund type of projects when analyzing appeal pools or portfolios. You can have the appeals, the individual appeals, then group by the program, and then you can size by the number of appeals sent, and then color that by the response rate. So then again, big green boxes would be good because you're sending a lot of appeals and you're getting good response among those. So now let's move a little more into the authoring part for a second on how to create this. So to create the scatter plot, we're going to move, we're going to display the task view. In case it's not open in the software, we're going to do that by going to the menu bar up top and then selecting view and then task view. That's going to open the task view on our left side. And then we want to do add new chart. This is going to bring up a pop-up screen with all the different charts. So in there we want to select the scatter plot, and then we're going to select it, close. Then the scatter plot is going to prompt us for 4 options. So the first 2 are for the axis, so the values that we're going to have on the horizontal and then the vertical axis. And then optionally, we can select an extra measure for size and also another field for shape if we want to. Just as a recommendation, as I said before, you can use either numbers or categories for these type of charts. But it's more recommended, or it works best when you have at least one number in there. So as we saw the age in our previous scatter plot. And then on the other hand, for the size also, you're gonna want to definitely have a number so that you can see a different scale of sizes, a different range. And then for the shape, it's perhaps better to have some categories. And probably you just want a handful of categories so that you can distinguish the different glyph shapes. Then all our charts have a toolbar at the bottom that you can access by clicking on a blue bar at the bottom of the chart. I'll show you these in the software. But the options that we have in the Scatterplot toolbar are the data configuration, which basically is going to bring the same interface we had when we created the chart. So we're going to be able to select again the X and Y fields and the size and the shape, and we can modify that. We're going to have the Property Explorer, and I'm going to talk about these more in detail, where we have some of the more advanced properties. So, for example, customizing the brush ups, the size of the points, things like that. And I will show these in the software next. Also, we have the define trends. This is going to bring a list with a different option for trend lines. So, for example, on the staff performance management example that I showed, we had the linear option. But in some other cases, you may want to use other type of lines, and I'll show some of these in the demo. Also, we have the option to show unselected values. So when this is unmarked, basically once you make a selection, all the data is going to disappear, all the unselected data. So it'll basically look the same as when you exclude data. A good rule is normally to have these data not set in that way, have the default just to show, because you want to be able to compare versus the selected versus the unselected. Then also we have the option with to jitter the data points, which this is useful when you have a lot of points that are plotted on top or closely to each other. So then you can click this, and this creates some separation between the different points. Then finally, you're going to want to edit the chart titles and labels. So this option allows you to change the size and the content and the style of the titles. So now let's go back to the heat map, and to create it, we're going to do the similar thing. And I'm going to go quickly through this because I do want to move on to the demo. So the same thing on our task view, we're going to select that a new chart, and then we're going to choose heat map. Then we're going to select close. In here we have, again, 4 options, but in this case, the first one is for the larger field, so the field that's on top of the hierarchy. Then, so in the case I showed before, it would be the department or unit. Then the detail field would be the officer or the staff member. And then this allows us to either sum or average quantities to determine the glyph size, and the same thing for the color scale. And the heat map doesn't have as many options as the scatter plot, because you're already configuring a lot of the dimensions when you're setting up the chart. So we have the data configuration. Again, brings back the wizard that we had when we created the chart, so that we can modify it. The Property Explorer with some of the more advanced properties, displaying the unselected values. In here, you definitely want to have the display unselected values, because I really recommend that, because you want to see, the selection, how much of the selection fills the whole box. That's a nice visual, so I'll show that in the demo. And also our option to edit chart titles and labels. So let me quickly see if we have any questions. We don't, so I'm gonna move on to the live demo. I want to make sure that I cover everything. So in here I have our staff performance management demo, like I was saying, and let me close for now the task view 2 just to get some more space. I'll show you how to set up the charts. But what I wanted to show is, in here we have our proposal pool, and we can see the age again, and then we can see the stages. So now what we can see, for example, is in here I want to select the 100,000 and over, see how our big proposals are doing, for example. So we can see this new line is for the selected data. So on average, they're performing a little slower. They're being a little slower than than the whole pool. And we have some that are doing quite well. So over here, but we seem to have a lot of proposals here stuck on the bottom. So let me try to select those to have a greater look. So I can grab a few from this stage. I can change to the add selection mode and grab a couple of these big ones too. And now I can see some details here. So there's 117 million in ask amount out. And out of that, we can expect about 32 million. Again, that coverage is a little large. Ideally, we would like to see 2-3 times the expected value. But it's better to have, I think, more than less in this case. But if we were interested, we can see the specific proposals here. And if we look at the rest of the pages, we will have the information about those prospects and that staff. Let me quickly move to the proposal pool, to our heat map. So in here again, we see our different officers sized by the ask amount. So we see some of these smaller programs are obviously are small, so they don't have a lot of ask amount out. But in addition to that, they have reddish and orangey colors. So let's have a second look at that. I'm going to grab the Law, Mayor, and Parents Fund. Let me switch back to replay selection mode. And I can see in here, we have about 30 million out in ask amount and about 63 million that we could expect from this pool. So we really have a case of under coverage here. As I said before, ideally we want to see 2 or 3 times the expected amount out. So in here we can see there's 60 proposals, and here's the point where I could start a discussion, start seeing, I can select a specific case. So in that particular case, the coverage seems reasonable. Let me go back. Maybe I can try with some of these. Albert Carnegie, and still higher coverage. Maybe it could be a little better. But let's grab, for example, someone here. So out of this pool, we could expect about 4 million, and we only have 500,000 out. So this would be an opportunity to make sure, that there's enough coverage of this pool, that there's a good assignment, and so on and so forth. So now let's try to look, on the other hand, at a success story. So Barry's Nancy here. She has a very reasonable coverage. So maybe now what I want to do is perhaps look at her pipeline again. And we go back here. And we see that especially some of these bigger proposals, I hover over and I see here it is the 25 million proposal. It has 5 months and is still in qualification. So perhaps these proposals could be getting advanced through the pipe a little faster. So again, that's another coaching opportunity. But that was a quick example on sort of how to read these charts, and I want to dedicate the last third of these webinar to show some of the authoring part. So let me make sure we don't have any questions, and I'll just move on to the authoring. So as I said in here, I want my task view. So I'm going to click on View, Task View, and that's going to bring me our task view here. Under the sign-in pages, the step number 2, I'm going to select Add New Page. And I'm just going to name this page Demo. And I can create a couple new charts. Let's start actually just with the scatter plot. So I have my scatter plot, and then I click Close. And then here for my fields, I want to select our proposal table. And I'm going to select our age and stage fields. So age is going to go on the x-axis, on the horizontal axis, and then stage, it's going to go on the vertical axis. And if you have a case where you have a number and then a string or a name, that's the way I would do it, because on the X field you can easily read the numbers from left to right, while on the horizontal, on the vertical axis, you can get some extra space to display the chart name, the field names, and the values, which in this case are going to be the stages. So now in here, I'm going to size this by the ask amount. So it's this proposal actual ask amount. And here I have my scatter plot. So now the first trick that I'm going to show you is there's a lot that you can do to center and to size the scatter plot. So I'm going to click on the white part not on any of the data, but on the blank part of the chart. And then I can press the plus sign, and that's going to increase the size of my points in the scatter plot. So again, just click on the background, and then the plus sign increases, and then alternatively the minus decreases the size. So I want to have a reasonable size that we can distinguish between the different amounts, but that doesn't get too convoluted, or that the points are too big, that are too close to each other. So that seems sort of reasonable. And additionally, also what I can do by clicking in the background is, with my arrows in my keyboard, I can move the scatter plot to center it. So ideally, I want to have as much of the points that I can have. So that seems to be reasonable. So now let's dig into some of the options that I was talking before. So we have our data configuration. Again, brings this small window to select all of our measures and fields. Then I'm going to leave the display property explorer for last, since that's a little more advanced. So I want to cover in here first, for example, the trends. So this is the linear trend that we had in the project that I showed before. And then, but for example, I could pick the minimum. So it's going to pick for each stage the minimum value. And you can sort of play around with those to see what you get. But normally, if you want a trend line, you will end up using the linear. And then also you can, as I said, jitter the data points as I said before. So you see every time that I click this, the spacing increases. And finally, in here I can edit my chart's title. So maybe I just want to call these stage versus age size by ask amount. Clean up some of these labels, and there we go. So now let me show you some of the properties. Excuse me. So in here we have different options. Some of the most useful ones are, for example, the point size. That increases the size of the standard point, and obviously applies the scaling according to the field that you assign for shape. If you, for example, also just want to jitter the point just in one dimension, so in this case, for example, we jitter, and since we have the continuous value of age here, that if we jitter too much the points, they can move into a different year. It's going to seem confusing. So if you just want to jitter the points in one direction, you can, in here, just select that. And then also with the linear transform, you can transform, create a transformation for the values. So you could use a log or root. And I wanted to show you also the brush ups in here. So the normal brush up is just going to show two values. The X and the Y, but it's not going to have any title. So the format that you can use in here for this is in this focus format string, and you can access this also from the help. And then if you select in here the customizable focus, that's gonna give you information on how to do this. But let me guide you through it quickly. Let me close the help. So basically, you're gonna write a string, and in here you can insert different fields and their values in the middle of that string. So the way you do this is, for example, let me get rid of this. You know, I want to have the prospect name. So I'm going to write the string between quotes. So I want to say prospect name, and then when I want to input a field that's in the data set, I'm just going to put the number. You can have several fields. So in the order that you add the fields, you put the number. And for example, I'm going to show you. So in this case, field number 1. So I'm going to close my quotes, and then I'm going to say primary staff name, which is my my staff name field. So now and this should show the value. So it's not picking up the prospect's name. Let me make sure that I have the right name here. Let me try with another field, for example, to see. I just want to show you. So if you want to add an additional field, you can do a new line by typing N /n. So this is going to tell to add a new line, and then, for example, I'm going to add the age of proposal, and I don't want a space here. Okay, so age of proposal, and that's going to be my field number 2. And my age field is called age. So it is picking up that. So as you can see, in here you really want to be careful with the name of the fields. I wrote it down, but somehow it's not working. I'm sorry. But for the sake of time, let's move on. So as I was saying, you can move the things, the points with the arrows here and center, and then I think that's all I wanted to cover for the Scatterplot. The heat map is very similar, so you can also access the charts from the top bar here. That's a little shortcut. And in here, I'm going to pick my core table. And our field is in here I want the staff group, primary staff group, and in here I want primary staff name. In here I'm gonna pick the ask amount, so pending ask amount. And notice how I can choose average too, so for the color I'm gonna pick the average as to expected amount. And the properties for the heat map are very simple. Basically, the one that you will mainly use is this color. If you ever use, I normally like the green red because it's very intuitive, but sometimes if there's outliers, then there's not much room for variance in the color, so you could try different color scales. Just an example, for example, in the middle I can change this to white. I'm having trouble with the webinar controls here, sorry, getting in my way. Okay. So that was just an example. We're running short on time, and I apologize for that, but are there any questions now? Okay, I'm getting if I could speak a little more about the timeline. Basically, the timeline, the way it works, it's very similar to the Scatterplot, and we have another webinar in a couple of months, I think it is, specific to that, but it's basically going to look a lot like our Scatterplot, but in here it's going to have bars instead of points, and it's going to show dates, and you can select the duration of dates. If you would like more details about that, you can just send us an email to support@advisorsolutions.com. But I'm not seeing any more questions, and since we're already out of time, I think I'm gonna finish it here, but I really appreciate your attention. Email us if you need anything, support@advisorsolutions.com, and have a great day.